began scripting this video around 24 hours after the news had broke regarding the passing of Scott Hall, without any clear direction in my head of where I wanted to go or what I want to highlight in this upload. Following everything that was going on with Scott's condition over the past few days has been tough, and like many others, I was pretty upset when I saw Sean Waltman's post confirming that it was time to say goodbye to the bad guy. Scott didn't put death over clean, he fought until the very end. His fans held on to hope, but in the end it was time for Scott to headline the big event up in the sky. I didn't want to put this video out the week Scott passed. I'm sure by the time this video comes out that most of the news channels and all the bigger channels have already moved on and they're covering something else. So the delay in this video will hopefully once again bring Scott back to the forefront, not because of the tragic news, but because some fans will want to celebrate the bad guy and remember just how important he was to professional wrestling. I think most of you know how much of a Razor Ramon and Scott Hall fan I was and still am through the videos I make and through the Reliving the War series. Not too long ago I put out the New Generation video that stated Razor Ramon was what the new generation was all about, and anytime the outsiders show up on Reliving the War, I always get excited about what's going to happen or what they're going to say. I've also highlighted Scott's low points in the past and the troubled life he had at one point, both in his career and personal life, and I think it's important to see that bad stuff in order to appreciate how Scott got a second chance and how he was able to celebrate his own career thanks to his sobriety. This video is going to celebrate Scott Hall, though this isn't a career bio video, this isn't a rise and fall and rise again of Scott Hall. I just want to give a more personal tribute to Scott Hall today while celebrating what I feel the bad guy meant to professional wrestling. When you first saw Razor Ramon, you paid attention. Big Scott Hall had worked in the AWA and of course the Diamond Stud was featured on WCW television, but the Razor Ramon character was what made Scott Hall stand out, and it was the Razor Ramon character that really made me take notice of Scott as a young kid. Razor Ramon was the epitome of cool, and I'll always have Razor Ramon down as the coolest, smoothest pro wrestling character to ever grace our TV screens. We don't need to talk about the Scarface influence because we all know the story, but it's worth noting that wrestling characters who rip off movies, video games, or other forms of entertainment usually don't get very far. There are exceptions, of course, with the big one being Sting, but there also wouldn't be a Crow Sting character if it wasn't for Scott Hall. Back to Razor Ramon though, and yeah, this all worked incredibly well for Scott, and he went all in. If you watch Razor Ramon in 1992 and then watch him again in 1996, you'll see very little evolution in the character, and that's because Scott nailed it from day one. There was really nothing to improve here, whether he was a bad guy or a good bad guy. The Razor gimmick stayed the same and there were absolutely no complaints. Fans loved this character. I've mentioned this too, but the Razor Ramon entrance with that slow, heavy bass loop mixed in with Razor's confident strut to the ring, how Razor would work the cameras and not the fans in the arena, it's one of the best standard wrestling entrances of all time. This dude, to me, was the total package, even before he threw a punch or performed a move. When the bell rung though, and when Razor Ramon would go to work, you get to see something else that made Scott Hall so special. Everything he done inside the ring looked great. Now, no one's gonna say Scott Hall's moveset was necessarily innovative. The moves he performed in the ring may even be considered quite standard, but what made Hall so good in the ring was the way he performed those moves. Many of his peers would say Scott Hall had the best working punch in wrestling, and here, have a look for yourself.
Razor Ramon is a proponent of integrated.
For you today, Vince.
Oh no, I'm there, Double J. Look, oh, you don't want to do this.
It wasn't only Scott's punches that looked and sounded believable, but he had put a little extra on every move he performed, and what's more, he'd give every move plenty of time afterwards to truly settle in, giving everything he did in the ring way more impact just by letting his opponent sell it for a little bit longer. Think about a wrestling match where it's move after move, constant back and forth. It can be good, no doubt, but you kind of forget sometimes that these moves are supposed to hurt. Scott Hall performs a move, he slams his opponent to the mat with force, he then looks at the camera camera, looks at the crowd, or he looks at his poor victim with just enough time for us to think, man, that's gotta be sore. And you know, anyone could do this stuff, and anyone can try and let the impact of moves settle for just a little moment longer, but Hall had that swagger, man. The character lent itself to the style of wrestling Scott Hall presented. It's an absolute recipe for success, and there's only so many guys in pro wrestling whose character complements their ring style like this. Looking over career highlights for the Razor Ramon character would be like treading old ground, because I've spoken quite a lot about Hall's story in wrestling before, and I don't want this to turn into another chapter by chapter look at Hall's biggest and best moments, but I'd be amiss if I didn't talk about a few matches that helped define Razor Ramon. Razor Ramon debuted as a villain, and entering into feuds with guys like Randy Savage and Bret Hart made being a bad guy quite easy work for Scott, but then Razor faced Bob Backlund at WrestleMania 9 and you could hear fans cheer for Hall. Razor Ramon as a character was everything Bob Backlund wasn't, and you don't need to be a rocket scientist to work out why fans cheered for Ramon here. He represented something new, and Bob Backlund maybe didn't have that same modern quality about him. Actually, he definitely did not have that modern quality about him. There was a time when Vince McMahon would pay close attention to fan reactions like this, and in a matter of months, Razor turned babyface with the help of Money Incorporated and the 1-2-3 Kid. You guys know the story here, and if you don't, check out my Razor Ramon career retrospective. Again, apologies, but I'm trying to avoid a full retelling of Scott's career in this video. The Intercontinental title would soon follow though. In the following year at Mania 10, Razor Ramon and Shawn Michaels became WWF trendsetters with the first ever pay-per-view ladder match in WWF history. Razor and Shawn stole the show in Madison Square Garden, going on to inspire a generation with one of the most captivating wrestling contests of the 90s. When I first started the Reliving the War series, Scott was still in the WWF. Those who join me every week for the long trip down memory lane will remember Scott feuding with the 1-2-3 Kid once again before moving on to the ill-fated Goldust rivalry. Shortly after this, Scott handed in his notice. He was going to come back to WCW and, in short, he was going to change the whole pro wrestling landscape. He didn't know it yet. Scott said he didn't think all that much of the outsider angle whenever it was presented to him by Eric Bischoff. But seriously, if Scott had a crystal ball, and if Scott knew he would effectively be the catalyst for WCW beating the WWF in the weekly television ratings, then I'm sure he could have demanded even more money than what was already written on his very lucrative contract. Scott's return to WCW on the May 27th, 1996 episode of Nitro is truly the stuff of legend. A moment we can pinpoint and say, this is it, this is when it all changes. The declaration of war on WCW Nitro is one of my favourite promos of all time, and since it happened on the Reliving the War timeline, I've made sure to use it at the start of every single episode.
You want a war? You're gonna get one. Now get the gun!
To pay tribute to Scott, that soundbite is going to play right up until the final episode. Before we have a brief look at the NWO stuff, it would probably be a good time to talk about something that I honestly wish I could learn more about, and that's the wrestling mind of Scott Hall and how Scott Hall understood professional wrestling. Scott's peers have talked a lot about how smart Scott was when it came to the philosophy of pro wrestling. Not just the moves and when to do the moves, not just who should win or who should lose, but why things are done the way they're done, where things are going to lead to, and why things should be done a certain way. Scott Hall, according to those who knew him, had brilliant ideas and brilliant foresight. He was someone who could tell what fans wanted to see because he understood where pro wrestling was and where pro wrestling was going. We get to see glimpses of his insight through the shoot interviews he's done over the years, and even when he wasn't in a good place, he still got it. You can tell he's very smart to the overall presentation of pro wrestling and why things would work and why things wouldn't work. Eric Bischoff would speak highly of Scott's ideas, and many of the things we saw on Nitro came directly from Scott Hall. Triple H would comment on how Scott would break things down during long car journeys, and Hunter said he learned a hell of a lot from Scott. There's a ton of stories out there about Scott's influence on people within the wrestling world, and I'm sure more will come out in the months and years ahead. It all speaks highly of his deep understanding of professional wrestling. His shoot interviews are must-watch too. You'll learn about Scott's creativity while also learning about Scott's business sense.
The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order.
When they say Scott changed the wrestling business forever when he jumped to WCW, it was both from a TV perspective and a business perspective. Many people think it was Scott Hall and Kevin Nash who got the first ever guaranteed contracts in pro wrestling, but that isn't true. It was Mark Mero when he signed with the WWF mere months before Hall and Nash left. And if you listen to Hulk Hogan, he'll tell you that it was he who got the first guaranteed contract, a 10-year deal in 1983. He said as much on the Steve Austin podcast. But what made Scott and Kevin's guaranteed contract so big and so remarkable was the fact that it led to practically everyone getting guaranteed contracts thanks to the panic signing and big defections that were happening immediately after the Outsiders showed up on Nitro. Vince McMahon was guaranteeing opportunities except for guys like Mark Mero, while Eric Bischoff was guaranteeing money. And yes, there simply had to be some sort of financial guarantees for other guys in the business, but Hall and Nash kickstarted the trend of the wider roster getting paperwork that said in black and white that they'd earn X amount in cash over X amount of years, legally binding. WCW was then built on guaranteed contracts. It was the place to go if you wanted to make money and never miss a mortgage payment, and this enticed a whole lot of guys to jump ship and sign with World Championship Wrestling. It took Vince McMahon a little time to adapt. He had guys working on his roster who got paid per appearance, no contract, just a handshake, and this is exactly what led to things like Rick Rude showing up on Raw and Nitro in the same week. The Outsiders' move to WCW has been credited as the catalyst of it all though. These were two massive WWF stars that Eric Bischoff and WCW wanted to secure, and to ensure Hall and Nash made the switch, a complete change to how contracts work in WCW was introduced. Both Scott and Kevin said they would have stayed with the WWF if they were given a guarantee, even for less money, but Vince McMahon wasn't prepared to do it.
With Scott Hall and Diesel, perhaps that was when once we started we're doing our guaranteed contracts, because we stayed out of that as long as we could. But right after that, we started with our guaranteed contracts, and that's what made them go to Turner. That, and of course, the sum of money.
And then you've got what happened on TV when Scott Hall and Kevin Nash joined forces with Hollywood Hulk Hogan. I think right now, I and the people who watch this channel are in a great position to talk about the impact the NWO had on pro wrestling, because we have been re-watching every single episode of Raw and Nitro during the Monday Night Wars, and with that, we've got a brand new perspective on how things went down. Every wrestling fan around the world knows how the NWO changed the game, and if not, those wrestling fans need to get educated ASAP, because pro wrestling today would not be the same if it wasn't for the New World Order. Through reliving the war, we've had the chance to go back and see it all again with a lot more information at our disposal. We now know why certain things happened thanks to books, interviews, podcasts, things of that nature. So it's almost like we're seeing things in a new, more informed way. We understood back then that the NWO was big because everyone was talking about it, but now we understand why it got so popular and how it got so popular. We watched Razor Ramon in the WWF at the very beginning of the Monday Night Wars, and while he was one of the most popular superstars the WWF had, and while he was the Intercontinental Champion again, the overall presentation of WWF Raw wasn't doing Scott or anyone else any favours. Raw during late 95 and early to mid 96 was a very cooker-cutter TV show, and WCW Nitro started off the same way. Over on Nitro, we were putting up with Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage battling the Dungeon of Doom in the main events, and some of that stuff lives on thanks to how bad it was. When Scott Hall showed up on Nitro, everything changed. He and Nash were portrayed as company outsiders who wanted to begin a war with WCW, with the strong implication being that they represented the WWF. So strong was this implication that the WWF tried to sue WCW over the Outsiders' debut, and both Hall and Nash had to admit that they were not working for the WWF on pay-per-view. The quote invasion separation of Scott Hall and Kevin Nash resulted in other rivalries in WCW coming to a halt. The company, in storyline, had to band together to try and stop this attack, but when Hulk Hogan joined Hall and Nash, then all bets were off. The wrestling world was turned upside down when Hulk Hogan turned heel, and as the NWO grew during 96 and 97, so did the TV ratings. WCW destroyed the WWF every Monday night, and a large part of that was thanks to the NWO and the more contemporary wrestling show that WCW presented at the time. Their undercard was better, their production was better, and the New World Order were making fans tune in just to see what they were going to do next. To be fair too, many fans look back at the NWO as both a blessing and a curse for WCW, and while Bischoff's idea was rock solid to begin with, there was also maybe way too much emphasis put on the group, and this leads to no finish line in sight, nor final chapter ever being written. But this simply doesn't change the fact that the New World Order completely changed the face of professional wrestling. While the NWO and WCW were kicking Vince McMahon's ass in the TV ratings, the chairman of the WWF was forced to change direction. McMahon simply had to update his programming to remain competitive. The classic story we hear is that the water coolers were being removed from Titan Towers as a way to save money. Business was bad in the World Wrestling Federation while WCW flourished, and you can pinpoint the moment it all began. It was when Scott Hall declared a war. Scott had some serious highs and serious lows in WCW. I covered Hall's lowest points in the company in a separate video, and yeah, what else can I say? The stuff with Hall's problems getting aired on TV through a storyline was bad. As the impact of the NWO fizzled out and as the WWF made a comeback in the ratings, it felt like the ship had sailed for the outsiders and that buzz was now gone. When WCW closed its doors, Scott would make a WWF comeback, wrestling Stone Cold Steve Austin at WrestleMania 18 and giving fans the greatest Stone Cold Stunner sale in history. Scott's personal problems would then truly take over his life, but thanks to Diamond Dallas Page and a lot of hard work, Hall got better. Hall said he knew it was a slippery slope and he knew he was going to fall, but he also understood that he was in a way better place than where he was before. Scott looked great after staying with Dallas, and not only did fans get to see the old bad guy back in great form, but Scott also got a chance to celebrate his own career, something that may not have been possible without Dallas and the work Hall put in himself to get better. People like to call the WWE Hall of Fame a load of shit because it's just Vince McMahon handpicking superstars of the past, and it's not like there's a vote or anything like that. But the Hall of Fame also gives certain guys a chance to commemorate their own career while addressing their peers and their fans. Scott Hall's induction not only celebrated what the bad guy accomplished in pro wrestling, but it also celebrated his sobriety and how he was defeating his biggest and toughest opponent to date. When he said hard work pays off, dreams come true, this could be applied to both his career and where he was in life right at that moment. And when he said bad times don't last, but bad guys do, he was surely talking about the hardships he went through before getting help from Dallas, topping it all off by reminding us that the bad guy was still around and still oozing machismo. The Hall of Fame speech and Hall's final words are what fans have fallen back on over this past week or so. I've seen it countless times in news feeds and social media, and it's such a great moment that encapsulates the later days of Scott Hall. That speech is going to be remembered forever. It's going to be what always plays when people pay tribute to the bad guy. You may think the Hall of Fame's a load of Vince McMahon shit, but it also gave fans a genuine moment that will always be synonymous with Scott Hall and the Razor Ramon character. For me, because of reliving the war and because I'm watching the 90s stuff week by week all over again, it feels like Scott Hall was a guy who just last week came out and made fun of the Steiner brothers on Monday Nitro. He's the guy who made a big jump to WCW just last year. He's currently a tag team champion with Kevin Nash. It does make the news of Scott's passing hit a little harder because, in a strange way, it's almost like the superstars of the 90s never grow old when you're rewatching all this every single week. The good part of that though is the fact that not only do I and many others have that positive imprint in our memories that Scott left through his matches and promos, but we're also right in the middle of celebrating his career all over again week by week. If it wasn't for Scott Hall, there wouldn't be a Reliving the War, because it isn't a stretch to say there wouldn't be a competitive Monday Night War if the NWO didn't happen. So I'm extremely thankful for what Scott accomplished in pro wrestling, and I'm extremely thankful that Scott put the wheels in motion on May of 1996. If I wasn't making videos and if I removed YouTube completely from the equation, Scott Hall's importance to me as a pro wrestling fan would still be immeasurable. I didn't think there was a single person walking the planet that was cooler than Razor Ramon. 100% instant fan of the character as soon as I saw him, and during those New Generation years, nobody carried themselves the way Razor Ramon did. When things got turned upside down with the debut of the New World Order, Scott became a pioneer, and he altered the course of professional wrestling while still carrying himself like he just knew he was the shit, and man, he was. Nobody could ever replicate Scott Hall. We saw what happened when someone actually did try to copy Scott, and that didn't work out too well. Hall was truly a one-of-a-kind performer, and if you were lucky enough to be a fan of pro wrestling when Scott was still active on a weekly basis, then you'll understand how important he was to whatever company he worked for. He had low points, he kicked out with the help of some great friends, and he got the opportunity to celebrate his career and receive recognition for both his work as a singles performer and as a member of the groundbreaking New World Order faction. I think that's going to do it. There isn't much else I can say that hasn't already been said, and again, apologies for this video not having any clear direction. I just thought I should put something out that highlights Scott's work and what he meant to me as a fan of pro wrestling. I'm happy that I got to meet Scott during WrestleMania 33 weekend. He stuck a toothpick in the DVD box I got him to sign, and it may just be a toothpick, but it's now become the most cherished wrestling item I currently own. I'm not going to forget Scott Hall. As a matter of fact, I'm going to go and watch a few of his matches right now. Thanks for everything, bad guy.
Say hello to Razor Ramon.